Oh hey, I hope you're all doing well out there. I appreciate you checking out this video. I've been meaning to do one of these for a while now, but you know how it goes. This is actually attempt number 4, so fingers crossed this one records properly. I had some troubleshooting I had to work out over the last week or so, but I think we're all good to go. So the way I wanted to structure this is 2 parts. First part is we're going to watch a time-lapse video of the piece we're going to be looking at today. And it's going to be pretty quick, so I won't go into too much detail on the process, just kind of give my brief thoughts as we're watching it. And then afterwards, I'm going to pull up the full layered file, and then I'm going to basically tear down all the layers to the initial sketch and then build it back up, just kind of describing the different layers along the way. And yeah, hopefully you can get something out of this. Maybe apply some of these techniques to your own style if you're getting into digital art. This is by no means a perfected style. I'm still trying to evolve it as, you know, I go piece to piece, but let's just jump right in here and we'll pull up the time-lapse video. All right. So just kind of a little backstory on these little Slipknot characters. Their new album was getting ready to come out back in 2019. So I always get all hyped up when the knot comes back around because, you know, they only put out an album, every 4 years or so? If that. So I always get super hyped. So in this case, I started drawing these little big head, little body Slipknot characters based off of their new masks. And the Slipknot Instagram page actually ended up sharing the whole set on my girlfriend's birthday. In the middle of the night, I woke up to my phone just blowing up. And yeah, so after that, I was like, oh, I'm going to draw the fucking Slipknots. And so, I mean, I didn't end up drawing every single look, every mask they've ever had, but I tried to do a full set from each album cycle. You know, disregarding MFKR. But if you noticed in the initial sketch here, he was actually the crash test dummy version of the mask. If you're all about that Slipknot lore, you know what I'm talking about. Before I started the final line work you're looking at here, I held a Instagram poll because I was a little unsure of which version of the mask I should do, because I wasn't trying to do both. I just wanted to do one and done. So it was a landslide. People wanted the ghost glow. So you could see, if you watch back in the line work, I'm actually just kind of freeballing the face to turn it into the ghost glow version of the mask instead of the crash test dummy. So once I have the full line work all completed, right now I'm going into just my color flats. This is the tedious part where you're just making all your color selections so that your foundation is all crisp and clean, good to go. So any of your rendering or shading you're going to do on top of the colors, it'll be easy and you won't be painting outside the lines because you have all your selections done in this stage. So the flats are done. So now I'm adding just the secondary colors to the dreads. And then you'll see I'll go in and add just a little bit of just shading before I jump into the full-on rendered stage. Just adding a little bit of texture to the mask here because this is going to be our main focus. So I'm going to try and dirty it up and add a little bit of grunge to it. You can see there I'm adding a little bit of that shadow underneath. Now I'm jumping right into the rendering stage. So this is where you're carving out all your forms. I'm using almost like a hybrid of cell shading and the lasso tool gradient rendering style from the old 90s Image Comics era. And then you see here I'm adding just a little bit of highlights on that nose, because again, I want your focal point to be the face, so you'll see I do most of the work in the face area. You'll start seeing some of the highlights popping up on the jumpsuit and the dreads. And this is very much a formula, this process. Each piece, I do about 75% the same formula, same layer setup. You can see those highlights popping in on the jumpsuit now. But each piece is gonna, you're gonna run into your different problems for each one. So in this case, the dreads were drawing a little bit too much attention to themselves, so now you can see I'm bumping them down into shadows a little bit, just making some minor adjustments before I add these final little highlights to pop out those dreads. But you can see here they're coming off a little too bright, so I end up blending those in a little bit more before I finish the piece. Just a couple of little final adjustments there, making sure everything looked good. Now from here, this is where I end the piece in the program Procreate. I do this portion of it in Procreate on my iPad, specifically just so that I can be lounging about and working on these. I don't want to be tied to my desk working on these pieces and not be able to, hang out. So from here, I'd call it about 75% done, and then I'm going to save it, and I'm going to bring up the file in Photoshop to do the finishing touches. So let's go ahead and pull up Photoshop. So this is what the finished piece is going to look like. So like I said earlier, I'm going to go ahead and strip down all the layers to the initial sketch, and then I'll build it back up. So again, you can see he was initially going to be the crash test dummy, but I keep these sketches pretty loose. I keep one file on my iPad on Procreate, and I just have all my sketches on just different layers and stuff like that, almost like a digital sketchbook. And then once I get a sketch I like, I'll select it and then bring it over to its own file, blow it up to the size that I'm going to be inking at. And then the fun part starts is here, I gotta strip all this stuff down. Alright, so let's just throw on the line work. And a couple of things to know about the line work here. I'll get rid of the sketch. So this is the finished line work. Really, the only thing to note is all the lines, all the little details, tick marks I'm just wrapping forms. That's all I'm doing. The more lines you put, the messier it gets, but at this size, it's about as busy as I want to get with the details. Not too crazy, because I want to imply some of these shapes in my rendering stage, so I'm not gonna go overbearing with the line work. But once I have this here, I'm gonna set the opacity to anywhere from like 50 to 65%. In this case, I think he's set to 65. And then from here, I want to get a base tone going. So what I'll do is I'll select all the line work, and I'll find whatever my base color is going to be. In this case, it's going to be the red of the jumpsuit. And I'll take my red and just crudely color in outside of him, so I get this almost like an outline. And then once I deselect it, I'll go in and clean up any gaps I have, and then you end up with this little shape. It's his silhouette. But from here, you have your base color. So everything I'm gonna paint on top of this is gonna be a clipping mask, which just means everything I paint on top of this is never gonna go outside the lines. So that'll save you a bunch of time, and you'll hold on to a little bit of your sanity as you're working on these pieces. So once I have my base tone and my finished line work, I'm now going to set the line work to an overlay layer, so that when I start adding colors underneath, the line work isn't going to be too contrasty. It's not going to draw too much attention to itself. It's actually going to react to whatever colors underneath it. So the lines are going to be colorized with whatever color you put underneath them. And that's, it lends itself to the particular style I'm going for with these pieces. So, I mean, like I said, this is no way a flawless, perfect style. I mean, you can go through all these different layer settings and find something that looks cooler to you. But I use overlay for the line work. And then from here, I'm just going to start adding in my flat colors, right? So the buttons, the gray of the mask, the dreads, the hands, his rings, the face paint and shoes. And then the only other thing to note about drawing in a bunch of black shadows and then setting the line work to overlay is, like I said, the harsh line work is going to disappear into whatever colors behind it. So in this case, I'm taking that into account, and I'm going to utilize it to bring more attention to those shadows. So I'm going to actually do a color flat selection for just those shadows up on the face, not the ones down here on his jumpsuit, just the ones in the face, because I want to bring more attention there when I start rendering it. Yeah, here's more of the shoes. And then from here, I'll add in all the secondary colors for the dreads. And then once I have my basic, there's a little emblem. Once I have my basic colors all set up to where I can now select each one of them separately, I'll add just a little, I call it a little zhuzh on just specific pieces depending on what textures or clothing the character's wearing. In this case, I'm going to add a little bit of shading down here on the jumpsuit, and then I'm also going to do it on the shoes as well, just so now I've got this little bit of shadow down here. So again, it's selling the fact that this is supposed to be a 3D figure standing in a 2D figure standing in a 3D space. Is that right? You know what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to wrap these forms. And again, just wrapping the forms, adding a little bit of shadow on the bottom of the mask there. And then I'm going to start adding some textures to the mask, because like I was saying in the time lapse, the face is the focal point. So I'm going to add the most kind of textures to the face. So you can see here, this texture right here is just a stock brush in Procreate that almost gives it this burlap kind of texture. I mean, shit, it almost looks like the original texture that was on the Ghost Glow mask, so that one worked out. And then on top of that, I added just a little bit more of a grungy texture to the face, just dirtying it up, making it look, you know, kind of like there's face paint kind of smeared on it. And then I added a mask and just painted out the top. So now I have the lightest point up here, this medium tone all up in here, and then a darker tone down here. And then lastly, I'll add those little the chipped away green paint, and then one last little layer of face painty smeary grunge texture. And the cool thing about taking the time initially to set up all your flat colors and make sure they're all crisp and clean is I'm not worrying about painting this texture outside of the mask and getting it on the dreads or getting it on the jumpsuit, because I'm only selecting the mask when I'm doing this. So definitely take the time to organize all your layers and make sure all your flat colors are all set up properly, because it makes the rest of the whole process infinitely easier. So now I have my finished line work, I have my flat colors, and I have my little zhuzh texture layer going on. So now we're going to figure out what our shadow tone is going to be and start rendering. So I'm going to show you what the render layer looks like, and then I'll kind of dial it back a bit to explain it a little bit better. So this is what it looks like, and I'm gonna, just to show you what's going on underneath all this stuff, I'm gonna duplicate it, delete the mask, set it to normal. So this is all it is. I mean, it looks just like our base color layer. So all I did was duplicate that and dragged it up here above the line work. That's set to an overlay. Everything below the line work is all the flat colors, and then everything above the line work is going to be all my rendering passes. So the reason I picked green is just that it's the complementary color for red. You could just Google a little color theory chart, or you can actually go through Procreate or Photoshop in their little color swatches section. They have a little diagram where they'll show you the complementary colors and stuff like that. So a little theory goes a long way. So once I have my flat shadow layer, I'm going to add a mask to it. And you add a mask by just clicking this little button down here. I'm assuming if you're watching this, you've dabbled in digital art, so I'm going to talk like you know what I'm talking about when I mention layer masks and stuff like that. Let me know if you would like a more basics of Photoshop breakdown, and I can do a whole video just explaining the ins and outs of these layer masks and how they can benefit you. But just for the sake of this kind of brief introduction video, I'm just going to move forward. So once you have your shadow color, you just start messing with the layer settings and figure out kind of which one looks cool to you. They all give it a little bit different look. I usually end up in this realm up here, the darken to linear burn area. I usually land on linear burn, and then I'll bump the opacity down, similar to the line work, anywhere from like 50 to 65%. In this case, I think he was at a 58. And then what some people like to do is they will what they'll do is fill the they'll fill the mask, and then they'll paint in their wherever they want their shadows to be. Oops. Uh-oh. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay. So they'll paint in. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, here we go. So they'll paint in wherever they want the shadow to be. And in my case, I do it the opposite. So I'll leave the shadow fully on. And I'll basically just paint out what I, what I don't want to be covered in shadow. So I'll paint out the areas like this by using the lasso tool. I'll make selections and then paint them out, so on. And you'll do that however you're comfortable doing the rendering pass, but what you end up with is something like that. And I can do another video where I show you rendering a section of a character just so you see what it looks like in real time. And then from here, first thing I notice, because after I do my first render pass, is I'm going to take notes, because although this is very much a formula that I implement on each piece, after I do this stage, I'm going to run into some problems possibly, or maybe not problems, but just certain adjustments that need to be made. So first thing I notice is that the dreads are taking away a little bit too much from the face. So I add another little layer of the render shadow color, and just to bump those dreads back. And I do one more pass on them. So now all your focus is up on the face. But as you can see, I was starting to lose some of the detail in those dreads, so I just did one more little touch up. And then from here, I'm pretty happy with my first render pass. Nothing is drawing too much attention to itself that shouldn't be. So I'm gonna go do my second render pass, and this one's a little bit different. I'm not taking a shadow color and doing a color fill. I'm actually setting the layer to an overlay, and I'm selecting the background color, and I do one more render pass similar to the first one, but just a little bit tighter in more focused areas. Again, I'm just trying to imply these shapes and these forms popping out. And then and for this character, I separated the dreads when I was doing the highlights, because I think I was anticipating it getting a little bit too messy. But I could have done it all on just one layer, but it's good to plan ahead sometimes and account for mistakes to happen. But it went pretty smooth. Now once I get it to here, I'm going to flatten the whole character, so now that he's just on one layer. And I might sleep on it, and come back the next day, look at him, and take any last minute notes before I go into my post-production phase. So from here, I just a couple notes. I thought that the jumpsuit, specifically the bottom, the red was a little too bright. It was drawing too much attention, so I added just a little bit of shadow, and I selected the whole character and just added a little layer set to 50% opacity, just to bump down and then I hit it with, I think, almost 100% black, and then just a soft little airbrush touch. And then I took a color layer with that same shading color and just toned down the red a little bit. So again, now first thing you see is the face, and you're not distracted by anything going on down here. So now when you look at him, you'll see his face. Maybe the emblem will lead you down to the hand, and then the fingers will lead you back up to the face, and, you know, maybe the fingers lead you back down here. But, you know, there's a good composition going with his overall design. So I'm happy with it at this stage. So now I'm going to add my adjustment layers. Just some brightness adjustments, some gradient maps. This one looks a little extreme, but I'm trying to sell the fact that he is standing in this environment that is just like a white sound stage with a bunch of lights on top of him. And then I add one last little layer to warm it up. And I'm just trying to unite the colors and not make it look like I used, you know, like a Crayola set of colors to color him. I'll show you here. I'll give you just a little bit of insight on these gradient maps. So I created this one here. It's set to soft light at 20%. So I'm going to set it to normal and 100%. So this is what the layer looks like. And I have a bunch of different gradient maps I use to achieve different effects. And I can do a whole nother video on gradient maps. I'm going to try and tailor these videos to whatever feedback I get, if any. So just let me know if there's anything that I'm not touching on here that you would like me to go into more depth on. But I mean, this looks cool if you were going for something like that, but I'm just trying to get just the essence of this, just a pinch. Like, imagine if this was the full bottle of gradient map. I just want a pinch of it in my recipe. I don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to set this to a soft light, about 20% opacity, and that's just enough to give me the color and the tone I'm looking for here. So after these, just a couple adjustment layers and gradient maps, I'm going to flatten him one more time. And then this is probably one of my favorite layers at the end. It's almost like the cherry on top. Is I take whatever background color, I'll do an eyedrop tool, and then you know, I'll select an airbrush, a soft airbrush, and I'll just add this ambient light all on the outside edges of him, down here, up in here, on top of his head, stuff like that. And that just further sells that he's standing in that environment. I'll flatten that again. So once I have it to this stage, I'd say, all right, he's about 90% done. The last 10% is going to finalize it. So I flatten him. So I'm going to get rid of all the layers underneath. So he's just this little flat layer right here. And, you know, at the time I was doing small little runs of stickers, so I wanted to see what they'd look like with the outline. So I'd throw on a little stroke layer. And then what I'll do here is I will add a halftone, a screen tone layer, similar to like a manga or something like that. This one is an older one I was using. I'm not too keen on how these dot patterns, they look a little too uniform, a little too digital. The ones I'm using on my current pieces are a lot more organic. They're actual scanned in screen tones from an actual screen tone sheet. So they look a lot better. But at the time when I was doing these, I mean, you're only going to see them about that big. So for what I was going for, it worked. Again, it's just a little texture on top that just kind of unites the whole piece. I'm a fan of the screen tone look, so I mean, I'm a sucker for it. But I'm not going to include it on like the skin areas or, you know, the lip here, just on like materials and, you know, different textures all included on. And then the very last stage is I add a noise layer set to an overlay. And here, I'll take off the screen tone here. So if I take it off, it's basically when you zoom in on a photo, you'll see this little grain going on, and I like to replicate that in my pieces. It just adds a little bit of depth to them, makes it look a little, not quite realistic, but I don't know, it just gives it a texture that I'm into. And yeah, that's pretty much the finished piece. From here, again, you know, I might sleep on it one more day, come back and just see, all right, if there anything else, but usually I'll get it to this point and I'll call it done. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you were able to get something from this. I mean, you gotta bear with me here. This is my first instructional video I've gotten done, so hopefully I'll get these a little bit more polished along the way. And like I said, I want to tailor these to whatever feedback, if any, I do get. So if there's a topic you'd like me to touch on more, just let me know in a comment on this post, and I'll respond to it with a future video. I'll also include the high-res image of this piece, so you can check it out in all its glory. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to check this out. This is going to be super helpful for me, just tearing down all these layers and rebuilding them, and just kind of seeing what works and what doesn't work, and really having to analyze my own work over again is gonna, I think, help me push the style to the next level where I see it going in my head. So yeah, I hope you stay for the journey and we can both kind of develop our art skills together. I'm gonna try to do these more frequently and see if I can get my whole recording set up to where I can maybe do some live streams. I've grand plans for this Patreon thing, but we'll see if we can just start slow and make something happen.